Unfortunately, you've grown up hearing voices that incessantly warn of government as nothing more than some separate, sinister entity that's at the root of all our problems. Some of these same voices also do their best to gum up the works. They'll warn that tyranny is always lurking just around the corner. You should reject these voices, because what they suggest is that our brave and creative and unique experiment in self-rule is somehow just a sham with which we can't be trusted.
The White House right now is confronting a confluence of issues, Benghazi talking points, IRS reviews of political groups, Justice Department review of journalists, phone records, and in every instance, either the President or you have placed the burden of responsibility someplace else.
Senior tax officials knew about this extra scrutiny of conservative groups since 2011, which means also during the election, and that this was withheld until after the election. Should the White House have been informed earlier?
On the IRS on Friday, they gave one version of the story that's changed several times since then. So can you just say plainly, does the President believe that they're being truthful?
Is there a siege mentality back there in the West Wing right now?
Well, look, it's clear that the press has turned. I'm not sure how permanent it'll be. Excuse me. But this surely is different from what we've seen over the 4 years, being acolytes and cheerleaders and really supine. And the reason I think, A, is the accumulation of scandals all at once, and the remarkable coincidence that the President was speaking early on about conspiracies and don't worry about the government, tyranny, you know, the IRS scandal, which is essentially the use of the second most powerful agency in government as an agent of suppression of political speech is almost the definition of tyranny. But that's number one. But the second is this. They really feel they were swindled by the President and by Jay Carney on the talking points. Whether it's the most material thing in the world is now irrelevant. But they were told again and again by Carney, and then last week he repeated it, that there was no editing from the White House and from the State Department, and he only could do that by redefining the word edit. And these are journalists who know what editing is. If somebody outside your editor said, strike that line, and you strike it, Carney would say there was no editing because you handed in the final edition. Everybody understands that is absurd, ridiculous, patronizing, and insulting. And they were on the receiving end of that, and that will cause a big change in how you look at the White House and how you hear every word that the President or Carney said.
This is not a very narrow cast inquiry. It seems to be very broad, and we don't really know what it's about since they haven't told us.
The Deputy Attorney General would have been the one who ultimately had to authorize the subpoena that went to the AP. This was a very serious leak, and a very, very serious leak. I've been a prosecutor since 1976, and I have to say that this is among, if not the most serious, it is within the top 2 or 3 most serious leaks that I've ever seen. It put the American people at risk.
Look, however serious the leak, and it was a serious leak, that doesn't explain why it was so widely, why the net was so wide. 2 months of sort of getting information on the phone events that were happening in all of AP, which I'm told by people who know this is unprecedented, very, very wide, and not at all targeted. Look, if Harry Reid calls it sort of unacceptable and shocking, I think it's sort of accepted that it really is. The other thing is what Catherine Harris said, which is there's a double standard, that the President's own terrorism advisor was on the phone the same night talking to people outside who would be on television. And he gets a pass on this, and AP gets this sort of inquisition. That's very odd.
Earlier this year, they didn't say a word. When Republicans held up for months and months security funding of our embassies, they're still doing this.
It takes funding to protect an outpost. Yes, it takes funding. Who cut the funds from embassy security? The Republicans in the House. That's who.
It has been suggested that budget cuts were responsible for a lack of security in Benghazi, and I'd like to ask Ms. Lamb, you made this decision personally. Was there any budget consideration and lack of budget which led you not to increase the number of people in the security force there?
No, sir.
Okay, that's all I need. Thank you very much. Okay, so it wasn't a lack of money, as we've heard by some people trying to suggest that.
Sir, this was an unprecedented attack in size and ferocity.
Charles, when the president says there's no there, it almost seemed, and I asked Dan Henninger this last night, that he was challenging reporters to say, no, really, there's no there.
Well, look, there are three theirs, and they are extremely important issues, and the administration is hugely on the defensive and hasn't really answered. And it's the same three we've always had. Why were the requests for security denied, including the desperate ones of the ambassador who ultimately was killed? Second, what happened on the night? How could America not have at least made an attempt of rescue? And the response by Democrats, well, it wouldn't have arrived in time. How the hell do you know in advance it's not going to arrive in time? How do you know it'll only be 7.5 hours and not 17.5 hours? That's not a response. And where was the president on that night? We've all seen the video and the pictures, well, the picture situation room of Obama on the night of the Osama raid. And everybody looks at that, oh yeah, he was really involved in that. Show me a picture of where he was on the night of the attack in Libya. Give me a timeline. Who did he talk to? What did he do? And lastly, the talking points, which are a fiction, and compounded by the fact that the president now says, I said it was a terror attack on the day after. That is not true. Even the Washington Post has said today it was absolutely a falsehood. It's a falsehood on top of falsehood. But the one advice I'd give to Republicans is this: stop calling it a huge scandal. Stop saying it's a Watergate. Stop saying it's Iran-Contra. Let the facts speak for themselves. Have a special committee, a select committee. The facts will speak for themselves. Pile them on. But don't exaggerate. Don't run ads about Hillary. It feeds the narrative of the other side that it's only a political event. It is not. Just be quiet and present the facts.
This has been a Sunfish production.